right. Welcome to the June edition of Skol Sessions. I am your host, Erik Castiglione, owner and head coach at Viking Athletics. Took a break in May. Our April podcast was about Murph, the history, how to prep for it, all that fun stuff. We performed Murph in May, and now we're moving on. So, moving on to something a little current in the CrossFit world. There's a lot that just came out this week with regards to coaching development. I'm in the process of writing my own training program. I have one that I've used for years, but I feel like there are some gaps in there. And CrossFit HQ runs a newsletter they call The Professional Coach. There was a video in that with some coaches talking about one of the early criticisms of CrossFit, which was you pay $1,000, you go to a weekend cert, and suddenly you're okay to coach. And the title of the video, little clickbaity, was all you need is your L1. So we'll get into that. And then a well-known CrossFit coach that I don't mention him by name, but I've referenced him on this podcast previously, has also just released a new coaching development course. So a lot going on when it comes to coaching and the coaching world. And our December podcast, we talked about the coaching and the coach-athlete relationship and what a coach actually is. And the coach is an educator, the coach is a guide, the coach is a cheerleader, all of these things. And that's what differentiates a coach from a trainer. Now, in the CrossFit world, you are not officially called a CrossFit coach until you've earned your CrossFit Level 4. So you're known as a Level 1 trainer or a Level 2 trainer. When you get a Level 3, you are an official CrossFit trainer. When you get your Level 4, you are an official CrossFit coach. So the first thing that I wanted to dive into was the video that went out earlier this week. The first person to comment on it was Joe Alexander, who actually ran both my Level 1 and my Level 2. And it's referencing back to the early days of CrossFit. Before there were CrossFit affiliates, it was an online forum, more or less. The workout of the day was released. You did it. You entered your times and scalings on the message board, and that was where the CrossFit community existed. So we've come a long way since 2001. And one of the earliest comments and criticisms that CrossFit had was about their certification process. So at the time, most other certifications required reading a textbook, doing some study, and then you would take an academic test, and suddenly you were a licensed coach. So the NSCA, NASM, a lot of traditional personal training certifications use that model. One of the gold standards in that side of the fitness industry is your Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, your CSCS, it has a massive textbook, and the test is comprised, it's still an academic test, but it's comprised of a theory and practical section. And so Joe's point was CrossFit is one of the only certifications in the fitness space where you go in and it's hands-on. Instead of worrying so much about theory, they're actually teaching you how to teach people how to squat. You're getting quick, actionable tips in order to teach people how to move, and no other certification was doing that. He's not wrong, but my contention was always that the CrossFit Level 1 was just a starting point. And there are so many movements to teach in CrossFit. There is so much more to learn than you're going to cover in a weekend that it's great for establishing a foundation, but you really need to build off of that. And I've gotten comments in forums being called a gatekeeper or whatever the hell you want to call it, because I had my thought was honestly, you should have a Level 3 before you're able to open an affiliate. So want to talk about certifications in general and how that works, because back to the conversation that those trainers were having where Joe said, the L1 is a starting point. He ends his comments by saying they charge members at the end of the Level 1 with continuing to go out and learn and constantly improve themselves as coaches. And that was pretty much the sentiment that was echoed by every other coach, was the level 1 is all you need as a credential, but then it's on you as an individual to go out and make yourself better. And one of them was contending that if they'd had to do some kind of year-long internship program, they never would have done it. They didn't want to do it for someone else. They wanted to do it for themselves. That's all fine. That's well and good. But the point is, they were all in agreement that level 1 is just a foundational piece. Now, from a legal standpoint, they are absolutely correct that the level 1 is all you need. Or any officially recognized certification that an insurance company actually insures. You need to be insured to be a coach. So, literally speaking and legally speaking, they are correct in that. Now, if CrossFit HQ truly believed that all you needed was a level 1, I don't think they would have the professional development track that they have since established. Level 2, level 3, level 4, all of their subject matter experts and specialty certifications and all that fun stuff. So they do want people to learn, and they do want people to develop as coaches. And I'm grateful for that, because I was actually just reviewing my level 1 notes, and there's so much good stuff in there. But again, it's one weekend and you're just touching on it, and there are still gaps in there. So I mentioned earlier that I'm in the process of writing my own. One of the biggest gaps that still exists in the CrossFit world is programming. And they talk about energy systems, and I give extreme credit to CrossFit. They are one of the few certifications out there that actually mentions energy systems. But all they show you is what it takes to recover from using each one, the work to rest ratio. There's nothing really about developing each energy system and how to manipulate rest periods and how you don't want complete rest unless you're testing it. So again, they graze the surface, but they don't delve deeper into that, and it's largely glossed over. And if you look at most people's CrossFit workouts in most gyms, nothing even touches the glycolytic or the phosphate systems. Everything moves out beyond 2 minutes of work and becomes pretty much aerobic. So essentially, the knowledge that is passed on about energy systems isn't even used because people don't know how to use it. So there was a gap there. That was something that I was trying to bridge in my new certification that I'm working on. And then there's also the fact that when it comes to movement patterns, CrossFit classifies them as weightlifting, gymnastics, or monostructural. And in my opinion, that does not go far enough. You need to differentiate upper body from lower body, regional, global, and local movements. So if we use a press pattern, a strict press would be a local movement. It's all arms. Add in a little dip and drive, and now you've got push press. That is a regional movement. Full squat into that, and you've got a thruster. That is a global movement. And it's important to understand the different training effects and how each one affects the body differently. And again, it's only briefly touched on, but they don't delve into it. So to say that the level 1 is enough, I think is misleading. And I think they are defending the brand, but they would agree with me on this. So on the flip side, when it comes to certifications, I think in the early 2000s, so I got my CrossFit Level 1 in 2010, and my first introduction to a CrossFit gym was a year prior, actually here at CrossFit Relentless. I was one of the first members, and one of the things that struck me was that my coaches, Glenn and Merle, were constantly going to new subject matter certifications. So they went to, before it was even certified by CrossFit, it was the Hybrid Athletics Strongman certification. Then it became the CrossFit Strongman certification. They went to CrossFit Gymnastics, CrossFit Kettlebell, CrossFit Weightlifting, CrossFit Powerlifting, which at the time was only offered at Westside Barbell. And then the very first CrossFit Powerlifting certification by Louis Simmons and crew that was conducted outside of Westside Barbell was held at CrossFit Relentless. So I gave them tremendous credit for constantly seeking to better themselves and to continue learning. And when I moved down to Philadelphia, the first thing I looked for when I was browsing gyms on the internet was the different certifications that the coaches had. And that's what I was looking for, was same kind of attitude, coaches that went out and continuously tried to learn. So unfortunately, a credential, as anyone can tell you, people put letters after their name. It doesn't necessarily mean they know the subject matter or they are experts. And in my early days of being a coach, I had a member that was very interested in becoming a coach and had let's just say he had very deep pockets. So he wound up taking pretty much all the same certifications that I had accumulated at that point. And so he had the paper, but he could not apply that knowledge. He couldn't convey it to members. He couldn't make use of it. And essentially he'd paid a bunch of money, and I don't even know if he could recite it. But he certainly couldn't use what he had learned. So credentials are not everything. That's for darn sure. But I do believe that coaches need to continuously learn. And at one point, I actually ran out of coaches to learn from in my gym in Philadelphia. And that's when I started trying to follow other coaches in the fitness industry outside of CrossFit and really try to expand my knowledge base. So what I found is, what's very interesting is, in order to be a USA weightlifting coach, it's the same deal. It's actually a lower barrier to entry than CrossFit because it's a cheaper certification. I don't remember the exact cost, whether it's $500 or $600, but compared to $1,000, and it's the same deal. You go to a weekend-long certification, you take a written test at the end, and you've got your level 1. Now, to be fair, USA Weightlifting also spends a heck of a lot of time on their practical piece. And I took both level 1 and level 2, and those are definitely up there with the best certifications that I have ever taken. And then, some other certifications, many of them actually don't require testing whatsoever. So I went to my CrossFit Level 2. Apparently I'm in the minority here, but I had a terrible experience at mine. At that point, I think one other coach and I had been coaching for over 3 years. Everyone else was maybe a year out of their level 1. And we got into an argument with one of the instructors over order of operations when it came to fixing a push press. And, at that point I had already accumulated a couple of subject matter expert certifications. I'd done CrossFit powerlifting. I'd done CrossFit movement and mobility, which gave us a framework to correct any kind of movement. Number 1, you fix the start position. Number 2, you fix the end position. Number 3, you fix what happens in between. Because if I don't start in the right place, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to end in the right place. And so we wound up arguing with the instructor over that. I didn't find anything really useful on it that I hadn't already developed from coaching. So that brings me to the next point, which is there is no substitute for practical experience. And everybody makes mistakes, and that's part of the learning process. But you need that hands-on experience, and that's a big part of what Joe and the other trainers were saying in their video, is get out there and do it, and that's how you learn. So a big part of the level 2 for CrossFit was and forgive me, I may be outdated here. It's been many years since I took mine. When I took it, there was no test. There is now. But the idea was to help develop your eye as a coach and your ability to correct people. You start one-on-one and then you move to a small group. So level 1 was a foundational knowledge of CrossFit. Level 2 was reinforcing that with a little bit more focus on your eye as a coach and how to teach a group as opposed to just one person. And at that point, like I said, I had started coaching full time, and I had so many hours of experience coaching that they didn't give me any feedback on my coaching style. The one day that I got evaluated, they told me that that was great. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Paid $1,000, give me something. And then I already covered one of the gaps in programming, which at that point I'd been writing programs for several years and didn't think they went far enough. But another disservice that they did is, according to the traditional CrossFit model, when you program, it's 3 days on and 1 day of rest. And that sounds all well and good. And when you're an open source fitness program delivered through the internet, that works just fine. But when you're running a gym that's open 7 days a week, what the hell do you do on the rest day? They didn't bridge that gap. And I think that's important knowledge to cover, at least to give people something to do to cover it. So there's a big reason that there are so many programs that CrossFitters can buy now. You've got Street Parking, NC Fit, you've got box programming, Mayhem, Comp Train, Buttery Boys. I mean, there's so many different programs that you can choose from because so many people do not know how to program. And this is a hill that I will die on, is the best person to program for your gym is you. You're the only one there seeing your athletes, their needs, and what they need to improve. And if you don't have somebody that's evaluating the programming on a regular basis and whether or not it's working, some random person on the internet that you're buying from, unless they're sitting there doing video reviews and actually looking at scores, it's just a cookie cutter program. And that really just bothers me because it's a disservice to your clients. And as a coach, the only person really that we answer to is our client. And if you're not doing the best you can to help them, then why'd you get into this? So a big part of developing knowledge is learning the program, because it shows an understanding of the movements, it shows an understanding of the training effects that you get, it shows an understanding of the human body. And when it comes to programming, one of the best certifications I ever took was box programming. It was founded by Jason Brown. I don't think he runs it anymore. But again, he actually gets into energy systems and he bridges the gap that CrossFit doesn't. And he gave names to a lot of things that I had already been doing and things that I kind of thought about, but he solidified it and gave me a way to frame it and name it. And once you get to a certain point when it comes to training, if you've mastered the principles of training, it's just about picking the right tool for the right job. And it doesn't matter what that is. So it doesn't, we'll have people that specialize in specific disciplines, as they should. But, I've had runners qualify for Boston Marathon. I've had a collegiate powerlifter make it to nationals. I've had masters weightlifters make it to nationals. I've had a strongwoman competitor make it to nationals and set a 2K record, it was a 1K record on the row erg for her age and weight class. So as long as you understand the training principles, you can get people to adapt and get them to where they want to go. But you have to build that foundation. And after one of my most recent cert I took was, as far as training is concerned, was Chris Himshaw's aerobic capacity, which was phenomenal. And again, he goes into energy systems, but he bridges the gap between energy systems and muscle fiber types, which I had only really thought of kind of separately, and it makes perfect sense to think of them together. So at this point, when you've kind of mastered the fundamentals and the science behind training, what you look for in a certification is something that gives you actionable advice or something that makes you think of things in a new way. And so I had to have that conversation actually with, it was not in the CrossFit world. It was called a pain-free performance specialist certification. Dr. John Russin's the one that created it. He's a physical therapist, and it was very interesting. Literally the entire first day is how to develop a solid warm-up, which is also something that is lacking in the CrossFit world, in my opinion. If you look at most gyms, They do a 20-minute general warm-up and a 10-minute specific warm-up. And if you're training one person for an hour, and it's a personal training session, and you spend 30 minutes warming up, again, that's probably not the best use of their time, and it's not the best service that you can offer. So he gave a framework in which you could get somebody pretty damn warm and ready to go with corrective exercises, a little bit of mobility work, and then performing the main movement pattern of the day. And it takes 10, 12 minutes, and you're good to go. And then you've got the rest of the session to actually do work. And I met another attendee who was a little disappointed in the cert because she's like, I feel like I know all of this stuff already. And I feel like that in a lot of certifications. But like I said, if you get one piece of actionable advice, or it helps you reframe your thinking and change something that you're doing, at that point it's worth it. So, at this point, I'm redoing our website and compiling my list of certifications that I've accumulated. And since I got my CrossFit Level 3, which is a professional certification, they require continuing education units and coaching hours to maintain it. So again, I do not believe they all believe the Level 1 is by any means enough. I think that was, again, a clickbait title. I think I'm up to 18 to accumulate continuing education hours, and most of them, again, were things that you've already learned from practical experience. So I specifically took one in training pre- and postnatal women, and I've trained numerous women through pregnancies, and the bottom line is that everyone's different and every pregnancy is different. I've had 3 or 4 women go through 2 pregnancies while working with me, and each pregnancy was different. And that was really the crux of this course. Chapter 1 was how to be a coach. Chapter 2 was probably the most useful part because it gives you a list of different professionals that are involved in the pregnancy journey, and you build your professional network. So that was actually helpful. But as far as the training knowledge, there was literally nothing new in there that I hadn't learned through practical experience. So that cert was a little disappointing. My CrossFit Level 3 I absolutely loved. It was, ironically, an academic test. You go back and you reread all of Greg Glassman's early articles, which for the most part are really damn good. Couple of exceptions in there. But you read that, you watch the early videos, and then the test, unlike the Level 1, is not regurgitation. It is application of the knowledge. And that is what made it stand out to me, and why I think it has that professional credential, is you can't just memorize a textbook. You have to be able to apply the knowledge, and that's really what it's all about. So that one was great. Aerobic, all the CrossFit subject matter ones that I went to were fantastic. I even went kicking and screaming to CrossFit Kids. I had no desire to take that, but my managing partner at the time required me to do so. And my whole thought was, this is stupid. Why do they have CrossFit Kids? Kids need to be outside running, jumping, playing, climbing. And that was literally the first thing they said at the certification. And what I hadn't realized was apparently a lot of schools across the nation are actually cutting physical education for children. And this was largely designed to be an alternative. And, the main instructor, his name was Todd. He's one of the, if you look back at some of the old CrossFit videos, he's actually sitting there right next to Greg Glassman. He's one of the early adopters, and just incredibly energetic, and hey kids, do this, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not me. So clearly, given my monotone tone of voice in these podcasts, but I still got a lot out of that certification. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was great, and now I know myself well enough to know that I don't really have the temperament for training young kids like that. So let's see, we had CrossFit Level 1, loved it. CrossFit Level 2, bad experience. Apparently that's an outlier. Level 3, fantastic. I had CrossFit Strongman, which Interestingly enough, when I went on to compete in strongman, every technique I learned in that cert is not how they do things in competition anymore. So I had to unlearn a lot of those techniques and tweak them and learn new ones. CrossFit powerlifting, I went to Westside Barbell, and I found it very interesting, but it was basically just, this is how Westside Barbell does things. This is the Westside method. And they've tweaked it since then, and it became CrossFit Conjugate. I think that was the name of the new certification. The problem was there was a lot of specialty equipment, and it wasn't really practical to implement in a group setting. So there was a missing piece there. You know, while it was extremely interesting and there was some stuff I could take away from it, it was not practical to run in a CrossFit gym setting. And they've since bridged that gap by tweaking the certification. And then you find out that most strength programs, the Jim Wendler's 531, the Cube method, all of them are largely based off of Westside's method. They're just tweaked versions, and a lot of what we do is based off of the Cube method. I've tweaked it even further. So I definitely got a whole lot out of that. Movement and mobility was phenomenal. At one point I went to Carl Powley's freestyle workshop, which also was fantastic. Talked about the pre and postnatal training. It was a little disappointing. Pain-free performance was fantastic. Both USA weightliftings were fantastic. CrossFit Kids was great. And then I took a couple through, box programming was great. I took a couple certifications through an organization called the National Sports Performance Academy. I've actually been sitting on their programming cert for a while. I never bothered to take that test. But they did sports nutrition. They did weightlifting performance, which is how to adapt Olympic weightlifting for sports other than weightlifting. So if you're a basketball player and you need to train for explosive power, how do we apply the Olympic lifts to that? It was a good course, but at that point, if you've already done USA weightlifting 1 and 2, wasn't really anything new in there. But for an average person, that was I think that would have been good. And then there was a speed and agility one, which was great because a lot of people still focus on agility ladders, and they're really not useful when it comes to building actual speed and agility. At best, they help you learn mind-muscle connection and make you think about your movements, but speed is largely about reaction and building your reaction time and reacting to external stimuli. So gave some cool drills on that, and some postural fixes and things like that to really help you take off faster. So that course was very, very interesting as well. And then the most recent one I did overall was the Two Brain Nutrition RX course, which I think a lot of the principles are based on precision nutrition, but it was really boiled down and really actionable towards building your nutrition business. So that one was also fantastic. You get a lot of tools to work with, a lot of feedback to give clients, and kind of a more direct approach, I would say, than precision nutrition. Not to knock precision nutrition. I think as far as taking complex subjects and really boiling them down, you can't get any better than precision nutrition, but a little bit of a different focus there. So at the end of the day, whether or not people take the tests, all you're going to get with the test is that credential. As long as you're building your knowledge base, you're on the right track. Any coach that doesn't take time to learn, doesn't continue to read, is not somebody that I want to work with. So there are 4 levels of mastery. Level 1, you're a beginner and you don't know anything. That's when you're just starting out. Level 2, you're a beginner and you think you know everything. Level 3, you're an intermediate. You know everything, and everything you don't know, you've invented. And then level 4, you're advanced and you realize that you really don't know anything. It was a tongue-in-cheek quadrant that we got from my former weightlifting coach. And the point is exactly what I just said. You got to keep learning. And again, whether or not you actually get a credential or invest in it, I do it because I'm required to maintain my level 3, which I need in order to maintain a CrossFit affiliate. There's no substitute for practical experience. That's really your best teacher. And I think anyone that goes to a certification and thinks they're immediately ready to get out there and run things right off the bat, that's just extremely arrogant. And, part of the reason that we have our coaches shadow classes and then gradually take over more and more responsibility is to build that practical experience. And the program, one of the facets of the program that I'm expanding upon now, the former program I used to train coaches, we focused a little bit more on movement patterns than on the movements themselves. So it would be something like, all right, you've learned how to teach the squat and the front squat. Now use what you know and teach this person how to do a wall ball, which is something that I don't think they covered in any of my certifications. And I got his permission to tell the story, but when I was putting Coach Marcus through this, he struggled for probably 3 minutes or so trying to give way too detailed instructions and just stumbling over himself. And it's a movement that he'd done probably 10,000 of at that point. But again, we think about it from an athlete perspective and not from a coaching perspective. So big part of the practical experience is making that jump from being a coach or being an athlete rather to teaching those movements to someone else. So from that standpoint, the practical is hugely important. And then when you're working in a business that belongs to someone else, the business owner is going to have protocols that they want people to follow. They're going to have a way that they want things done. And that's part of being a good employee and learning those systems and learning those procedures. That's a big part of on-the-job training as well. And then at the end of the day, when it comes to the clients, if you're running a group class, you got to learn how to manage logistics. You got to learn how to fit everything in a class. You got to keep the flow of the class going. And that's not something they teach in any of these certifications. That just comes from doing it over and over and over again. So we require 50 hours of shadowing. And for the first 15, they're pretty much just shadows. And then after that, they gradually start taking over more and more responsibility in class because that's how you learn. So there is no substitute for practical experience. That's really the crux of this. And to bring everything full circle, a big part of what CrossFit teaches is building your toolbox of cues. And a cue is a short piece of actionable instruction. It is not coaching. A cue should refer back to coaching that was already received. So if somebody is yelling knees out, knees out, knees out, and the athlete has no idea what the hell the coach is saying and doesn't understand why they drive their knees out during a squat, the cue is not going to be effective. So that's where the teacher part of being a coach comes into play. It's your job to explain things, explain why, and then the cue now references something else. So CrossFit's big on cues, but cues need to, I think of them as, if you go to the computer analogy, the cue would be a shortcut to a larger application. So to bring everything full circle, there is no substitute for practical experience. Keep building your knowledge base on your own as a coach. And CrossFit Level 1 really is just a starting point. And that's what every single one of those coaches said, is it's a jump off point and you can go from there. So if you're interested in becoming a coach here at Viking Athletics, we are always willing to take on new people. But it is a process, and you got to be willing to put in the time and the effort. And you got to have the right motivations. So we do screen people before we admit them to the program. We have a certain, like I said, motivation that we're looking for. And it's an honor to be a coach. You're here to serve others. That's really what it's all about. And if you're not willing to help, if you're doing it for your own edification, frankly, I don't believe you're in it for the right reasons. And we guard, you can call me a gatekeeper if you want, but that's why we guard access to our program, is you got to have the right mindset. So until next time, I didn't mention that I am enjoying a Balvenie Caribbean cask now that it is just about summer and it's warm out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that. And we'll catch you guys later. Skol.